going to share my screen just to see where we are. So on my screen, you can see the structure of our projects, of our feasibility study, and I just want to point out the method that we are using. The end of all that we are doing is to evaluate the financial feasibility of an investment. In this process, in the end, we need to compare the value of the capital that we need to invest some time at the beginning of the whole process. So to compare it to, on the other hand, the financial gains that the operation of the infrastructure created through the investment would bring us, of course, in the future. So to get here, in the, I guess, second chapter, we configured the investment budget. Of course, in my case, I made my simulation for a company that would be producing fruit juice. This is my investment budget. All of you have your own budgets, of course. But I want to remind you that the investment budget at its turn was configured based on the needs on our operating cycles. So we started by defining our business idea. We created the project of our operating cycles. And then after, of course, understanding the different operations within our operating cycle, we were able to make a list of fixed assets, infrastructure components that we would need to operate to sustain this activity in the future. Whether it was land, different type of buildings, different equipments, furniture, computers, trucks, software, and I don't know, other types of fixed assets. So we got to an investment budget. In my case, the total value of the investment budget was of, as you can see, almost 400,000 euros, 384,000. Then we needed to find possible financing sources. All of us, we tried to identify programs that offer subsidies for investments. And in my case, this is the structure of my financing sources. I planned for, on one hand, subsidies for investments, but at the same time, a lease contract for, I believe I had there a truck or no, a forklift, then a bank loan, and of course, equity. So now the question is it a good idea to invest these financing sources in this infrastructure or under this form seen as a picture here? Now, what would be the objectives, our objectives, if we were to do the investment, if we were to invest capital? You see, on one hand, the capital would be hard to obtain. We need to convince the bank, we need to convince the leasing company. Of course, we need to prepare a project and convince the agency that we identified to offer us subsidies. And of course, we need to convince our shareholders to come up with the required equity. So again, the access to capital is difficult, in particular for a startup, and that's our case. We are talking about startups. But even if we do get access to capital, the capital will involve risks, such as the bank showing up at a certain point to ask for the money back and maybe try to liquidate some of our assets to get it back if we would not be able to pay it back, and many others, unfortunately. But maybe more directly important, costs. Of course, we need to pay the bank interest and bank fees. Same for the leasing company. We probably need to pay dividends to the shareholders. And there could be other types of costs for maybe other types of financing sources. So it's not that we are that happy doing the investment, at least for these reasons. But what would be the reasons for us doing the investments? Of course, these reasons are connected to the, hopefully, to the financial benefits that we would gain in the future. And these financial benefits, these financial gains, should be enough to allow us to recover the capital, the financing sources, and to remain with a certain surplus as a return. And of course, this surplus should be enough to cover the cost of the capital, the dividends that we need to pay for the equity, the interest that we need to pay for the leasing contracts and the bank loans, and the different other types of costs. Maybe we even need a return that would be higher than the average cost of the capital, which I guess would allow us to increase our equity. So to collect uh, additional financing sources maybe for the future. So again, our, I guess, two main objectives with the investment would be to recover the financing sources, the capital, the invested capital. So one, and two, to generate a certain surplus, a certain return. Now, this is what we mean by the financial feasibility analysis. When we say that we want to evaluate whether the investment is feasible from the financial point of view, so let's say doable, uh, in essence, this is what we mean. We need to test if the operation of the investment in the future would allow us to recover our capital and to generate the desired return, at least, of course. So, to do so, of course, we need to compare the investment to the future financial gains. So, this is why, well, mainly, of course, there are many reasons for doing the financial planning, but in such a feasibility study, the main objective with the financial planning is to, in the end, be able to forecast those future gains and then to compare them to the value of the invested capital to do this feasibility analysis. Okay, so this is where we are at the fifth, and of course we'll do today the last chapters. So at the feasibility analysis that we will continue today with the sensitivity and risk analysis. And within this financial feasibility analysis, as I was saying, we will compare on one hand the value of the capital invested, or from the mathematical point of view, basically the value of the investment. We already know it. We have it in our investment budgets. And on the other hand, the value of the annual, of course, future estimated financial gains. We compare the two, so the investment to those future financial gains. And in doing so, we will calculate several financial indicators, such as those that you can see here, the net present value, the internal rate of return, in particular, these two. These are the most commonly used ones. And I expect that most of you already, well, know them, at least heard about them, whether it was in practice or at other disciplines during your bachelor's degree cycle. So, I have my financial forecasting here for the first 5 years of operations. We've done it. We've basically finished it the last time that we've met, and I can see that you have tried to do the same for your own investments, for your own business ideas. Now, I was talking about the future benefits brought by the operation of the investment, of the infrastructure created through the investment. Now, do we see them through the lenses of the net profits? It's possible, but most of the times in, well, all over the world, it's not the net benefits that we are using. Uh, we consider the net operating cash flows to be the most accurate version. So I need to get from this budget of revenues and charges that in the end, of course, calculates the net profit or loss, the net result. I need to get from this to a cash flow statement. So the budget of revenue and charges, of course, contains, as the name says, revenues and charges, and calculates the result, a profit or a loss. Whereas the cash flow statement contains cash inflows and cash outflows. So cash collections and, on the other hand, payments. And the difference between the two would be some sort of a net cash flow. I'm saying some sort because usually the cash flow statement is organized on three activities: the operating activity, the financing activity, and the investment activity. We are interested in the cash flows from the operating activity because these cash flows are seen in practice all over the world as the basis for, as I was saying before, recovering the capital invested on one hand and generating a relevant return on the other hand. So uh, I'm not going to waste any more time. I'm just going to create some space here to prepare a cash flow statement. And of course, I expect you to do the same later on. So to do so, I'm first copying the budget of revenues and charges. So copy paste. In a second stage, I'm creating the links to the initial budget. So I'm taking the values from the initial budget. Give me just 1 minute. Finish. As always, I'm keeping the links. I'm not pasting values. So the operating activity ends here. I'm going to insert the charges with the income or profit tax. And I'm not interested in the rest because the rest is part of the financing activity. And as I was saying, what I'm trying to build is a cash flow statement just for the operating activity. Now, within this cash flow statement, I want to see cash inflows and cash outflows. So now the question is, can I put the equal sign between the revenues and the cash inflows from the operating activity? In my case, I'm selling apple juice, and I have already estimated the revenues from selling apple juice for the first year to 200,000 euros. This means that I'm probably signing contracts, sending bills, and based on the bills, and of course, making deliveries, and based on the bills, I'm registering into accounting something like 4111, yes, clients, the client's account equals 701 revenues from selling of finished goods. maybe possibly by also collecting value-added tax. That's not important, I would say, for the time being. Now, if I'm selling apple juice, I'm sorry, of 200,000 euros within the first year, which by the way could be for me 2027. If I will sell apple juice of 200,000 euros in 2027, so I register revenues of this value. Does that mean that I am also collecting as cash the entire 200,000 euros? Not necessarily, at least in my case, because for me, I'm planning to sell the apple juice not to the end consumers, but to supermarkets that at their turn would be selling the apple juice to the consumers. If I were to sell it to the consumers, uh, for sure I will collect the price at the moment, at the time of the sale. But as I am selling to other companies, it's highly probable that I'm going to accept trade loans. I'm going to grant trade loans, which means that possibly I would sell apple juice of 20,000 euros today, but grant the client, a supermarket, a trade loan for maybe 30 days. So I register the revenues today, 20,000, but I collect the cash in 1 month. So again, between companies, especially within such of a scenario where we are talking about a small company dealing with uh, more powerful distributor as a partner, it's very probable, if not sure, that we will be forced to accept collecting the cash at a later date. So, what does this mean for us? This basically means that if we have revenues of 200,000 euros for the first year, we probably don't have cash inflows from the selling of the apple juice during the first year of the same value. We might be collecting 150,000 during the first year, and at the end of the year, uh, we might end the year with maybe receivables of, who knows, 50,000 euros to be collected within the following year. So this is one important reason for which there might be differences between the value of the revenues and between the value of the cash inflows from sales, the receivables, the trade loan policy. Uh, of course, during the following years, a slightly different phenomenon would happen, as on one hand, we would continue not to collect the entire value of the annual revenue, but on the other hand, in year two, we would collect the receivables at the beginning of the year that remained from year one. So it's that these are important factors that create differences between the cash inflows from sales and the revenues. Of course, you can also say that companies that also collect value-added tax, they should also take into account the inflows with the value-added tax, and of course later on the outflows. But for us, it will be less important, so we are going to ignore them, which is done in most of the cases in practice in such analysis as ours for feasibility studies. I'm not going to go into details in this subject. If you have questions about it, you can ask them at any time. So, to simplify things, I will just consider, I will just, yes, imagine that the value of the revenues is equal to the value of the cash inflows. It's not very accurate for me. It might be very accurate for most of you, those that are selling to the end consumers. So I'm going to leave under these circumstances. I'm going to leave these amounts such as they are, so equality between the cash inflows and the revenues from the sales. However, I can do this for the revenues from subsidies. Why? Again, this is my table with the financing sources. So I'm planning I'm hoping of obtaining subsidies for investments of about 255,000 euros. I'm going to collect them at some point, I hope. But that point would surely not be during this operating period. According to my plan, this is my implementation chart. So I'm preparing the feasibility study now, and I'm submitting my project, hoping to convince a certain agency, as maybe the uh, agency for regional development, Western Agency for Regional Development, ADR-West. I will try to convince them to grant me the subsidy for investments of, as I was saying, about 255,000 euros. And of course, they will analyze my project at some point. Let's say that they decide to grant me the subsidy. So at that moment, I'm signing a subsidy contract with them. Through the contract, of course, they take the obligation upon themselves, of course, to pay me the subsidy. But they're not paying me the subsidy right away at the moment the contract is being signed. For several reasons, we've discussed them a few weeks ago. My point is that at the beginning, when I signed the contract, I'm registering my subsidy into my accounting. On one hand, I'm registering the subsidy for investments in the account. Maybe I can write it down here. In the account 475, subsidies for investments, but the subsidy is not collected yet as cash under the form of cash. So I'm registering the receivable for five, probably five, depending, or two, depending on the type of subsidy. So when I sign the contract, I'm registering the receivable. Well, I'm registering the subsidy already as a financing source in my balance sheet on the equity and liability side. So on the side of the financing sources. And on the asset side, I'm registering the receivable, the right to collect towards the agency. Then, during the implementation period, and this depends from one program to the other, the mechanism through which they are going to pay me the value of the subsidy. But in any case, during this implementation period, in our cases, the implementation periods are of 2 years, which is for sure common for investments that also involve buildings. So during this period, we are going to collect the subsidy as cash. So something like this is going to happen in our financial accounting. So on the, let's say, right side of the balance sheet, you know what I mean, the financing sources side, we are going to have 155,947 euros, of course, in lei, as subsidies, financing sources. And now, on the asset side, we are going to have, hopefully, 255,947 euros in lei, of course, as cash in the bank. Of course, throughout the implementation period, we are going to use the cash to pay for the different fixed assets that we have in our budget. You can see it on my screen. And at the end, by the end of the implementation period, on the right side of the balance sheet, we are going to have the entire value of the subsidy in for the account 475, subsidies for investments. And on the asset side, we are going to have all these fixed assets, land, building, equipment, and so on. So then the operating activity begins. So again, the subsidies at this point, they are already collected as cash. However, we registered no revenues, as you can see here, we registered no revenues from subsidies. From the accounting point of view, now within the operating activity, so once the implementation of the project, the investment is finished, we start the operating activity, and within this operating activity, we are going to start registering the depreciation of the different investment components: buildings, equipment, forklift, software, furniture, computers, and whatever else we have there in our budgets. So month after month, we are registering into our accounting, doing right 6811 charges with the depreciation equals 281 for the tangible assets or 280 for the intangible assets. So during the operating period, during this period, we register the depreciation charges, and we've estimated them right here, depreciation charges. Now, when recognizing the depreciation charges, at the same time, we are registering the revenues from the subsidies. So month after month, as we register the depreciation charges like this, immediately we reduce the balance of 475, so the account for the subsidies for investments, and we recognize automatically part of the subsidies as revenue. So I believe it's 475 to 7854, I believe. So we are doing this month after month, year after year, throughout the operating period. And we've estimated in this manner the revenues from the subsidies. And in my case, but in most of your cases, the depreciation period for at least some of the investment components would be of 20, 30, 40 years, which means that we are going to continue registering revenues from subsidies for 40 years. But that does not mean that we are going to collect cash. We've collected the subsidies as cash under the form of cash during the implementation period. So even though we are registering within our financial accounting system, we are registering year after year revenues from subsidies, as I have shown you, we won't be collecting any cash in accordance. We've collected the cash for the subsidies at the beginning during the implementation period. So let's say, maybe to be more clear, let's say here inflows, cash inflows from sales of apple juice. And on the second line, I'm going to write cash inflows from subsidies for investments. And these are zero in our case, at least. There are no cash inflows throughout the operating activity from subsidies for investments. So these are my total operating cash inflows. That's it. Now, I want to continue and to estimate the outflows, the payments from the operating activity. Can I say that the charges with the raw materials, in my case, the apples, can I say that that these charges convert into payments? I mean, for sure, I will pay for the apples. I'm planning to. But the question is the same as for the sales. If I'm registering charges of 60,000 euros in the first year with the apples, does that mean that I'm paying 60,000 for apples? Not necessarily, because remember, please, the charges within our financial accounting, the charges are what? The monetary value of the consumptions. So the fact that I have here charges with apples of 60,000 within the first year means that I'm planning to consume apples of 60,000 euros worth. However, I might pay for at least part of them before the first year or after. Imagine the scenario where I would buy apples before the beginning of the first year, so at the end of the last implementation year, and I'm storing them. I can store the apples, in my case, having a warehouse for that, a special warehouse. I can store them if I want to, of course. I can store them for maybe 8, 10, sometimes they even store them for 12 months. So it's conceivable to buy the apples, or at least a lot of apples, at the end of the last implementation year, pay them then, so have the payments with the raw materials done then, before the first year of operating activity, and consume them throughout the first year. So register the charges with the consumption, of course, during the first year, but the payments could have been done before. So I could have, imaginably, no payments for raw materials throughout the entire first year. It's possible. At the same time, maybe I could buy apples throughout the first year, but I always get a trade loan from my own suppliers. And maybe the acquisitions that I'm doing in November and December 2027, my first year of operations, maybe I don't get to pay for that in the first year, but I'm going to the payments at the beginning of the second year. So again, here as well, there could be differences between the charges in this case and the payments for apples. Again, it will depend from one operating cycle to the other, from one company to the other. I see no reason for us losing a lot of time with this. So I'm going to simply make the assumption that the value of the charges will be equal, approximately equal to the value of the payments within a certain period of time. So I'm simply going to say that the charges with the apples are equal to the payments for apples. I will say payments. I don't remember whether payments is written with an E or without an E. Please correct me. If it's without an E. So payments with raw materials in the same manner, payments for, of course, the packaging materials, payments with gross wages, payments with for social charges. Now, do I have depreciation payments? This doesn't exist. So I can't simply say depreciation payment 0. I left here the cash inflows from subsidies for investments, even though they were 0. to see that this could be, you can collect cash from subsidies, and you do, but in our case, this does not happen throughout the operating, the forecasting period. But depreciation payments, I can't even leave them here as zero. There are no depreciation payments. So I'm deleting the entire row. There are depreciation charges. We calculate the depreciation charges as an indicator for the consumption of the fixed assets, but there are no payments. There are, however, payments with the electricity, water, sewage, gas, taxes, accounting services, telecommunications, promotion services, transportation services, office materials, and bank fees. So these are not interests for the bank, because the interest payments are considered to be financial payments and automatically part of the financing activity. Bank fees are considered to be operating charges, and I'm going to keep them as payments within the operating activity. I'm also including the income tax, and in my case, at least for the fifth year, it is being replaced by the profit tax. I'm going to include them within the operating activity. Please do the same. So now I can calculate the total of the payments, the operating payments. And there's a difference between the inflows and the cash outflows. I'm going to calculate the net operating cash flow. Again, difference, the annual difference between the cash inflows and the cash outflows from operations. So please retain that this is the indicator that we are going to use as a representation of the benefits that the investment would generate in the future during its operation. So the net operating cash flow. And this is no longer a budget of revenues and charges. Well, the changes were not that great, but it's not a budget of revenues and charges, it's a cash flow statement. For the operating activity. Okay, so now we have everything that we need to perform the feasibility analysis. On one hand, I have the value of the capital to be invested, or if you wish, the value of the investment. On the other hand, I have the future gains obtained based on the infrastructure created through the investment within the operating activity. I need to compare the two. And in doing so, as I was saying, we will calculate several financial indicators. Now, before doing so, we need to have a debate. Let's say that I'm asking you to lend me 100 euros today, and I'm promising to pay it back in 1 year, in 2026. If I do so, if I'm paying you the 100 euros in 1 year, are you losing anything? And if so, what? Is it a fair deal?
You are losing due to inflation. The money loses its price, its value.
So what you point out is correct. Let's say that today with 1 euro we can buy a kilo of apples, which is maybe more or less close to 5 lei, possibly. So today you would have the option to buy 100 kilos of apples with, assuming that you need 100 kilos of apples. Let's say that you have the option to buy 100 kilos of apples with your 100 euros, but of course you don't. You pay the 100 euros to me. After 1 year, I'm paying you the 100 euros back, but because of the inflation, I don't know, the estimated inflation for 2025 in Romania, at least, or in lei, not in euros, but I guess it doesn't matter that much. The estimated inflation, I believe it's of about 8%. For sure, it will be more. I mean, I don't want to say that, but it seems like it will be more. Uh, so let's say that it will be 8%. That would mean that in 2026, when I'm paying you the 100 euros back, you would only be able to buy, well, approximately 92 kilos of apples. So you would have lost about 8 kilos of apples because of this. So, yes, I'm paying you the nominal value of the loan back, but in real prices, I'm only paying you 92. So I'm paying you less. The purchasing power of the 100 euros is decreasing because of inflation.
Uh,
However, this is not what I'm talking about, because we've done our financial forecasting without inflation. We've not forecasted inflation. So all those, in my case, future net operating cash flows are not inflated, do not contain inflation. So you are right in what you are saying, but in our case, it doesn't really apply. This is not what I'm talking about. By ignoring the inflation, are we still losing? Are you still losing something by lending the money to me?
Well, probably if you would put it in a bank, you should have some profit on it, and so if I borrow to you, I will probably get nothing.
Yes. Yes. Let's go with that. So you have, I would imagine, different possibilities of, let's say, investing. Yes, you could create a bank deposit and expect right now, of course, with under inflation conditions, the interest rate for bank deposits in lei, again, I don't know how much it is in euros, but in lei, I believe it's about close to 7%. So let's say that you would have that option to create a bank deposit today, and in 1 year, you would be able to get your 100 euros back plus 7 euros interest. So some sort of a financial gain. You have that option. You probably also have other options. And for us in economics, usually the reference in such a discussion is the option to buy state bonds, right? So bonds sold by maybe the Ministry of Finances. The state estimates that it needs, I don't know, 2 billion euros to cover its budget deficit, and it releases state bonds. You buy state bonds of 100 euros. and you are promised to be paid, of course, your principal, your money back in whatever it may be, let's say 3 years, and you are promised an interest rate of, for the state bonds as well, the interest rate, as far as I know right now, is around 7%, somewhere around there. Let's say 8%. Let's make it just a little bit more. So this is always taken as a reference in this field, because all over the world, we usually say that the investments in the state bonds, they can be seen as safe investments, risk-free. Risk-free in the sense that, as we have two objectives, to get our money back, the principal, and to get the interest of, in this case, €8 a year. I'm simplifying a bit. We like to say that there's no risk for both of the objectives. For sure, we will get the principal back, and for sure, we will get the promised interest. So again, this is what we generally believe in the economic field. We see these investments as risk-free. Now, let's say that you have indeed these options. You probably have more. You might be able to buy shares from existing companies, shares that promise you maybe 15% return, some less, some more. So you probably have such options. So what does that mean? This means that if your basic investment opportunity can grant you, let's say, 10% return in 1 year, if you have €100 today, you will basically have €110 in 1 year. So if you don't invest that €100, but you give it to me as a loan, in 1 year, when I'm paying you the loan back, 100, you would have lost €10, of course, compared to your opportunity of investing. So my point is that for you, because you have opportunities, €100 today is not equivalent to €100 in 1 year, what I'm suggesting paying back to you, but rather is the equivalent of €110 in 1 year. So this discussion that we are having right now is seen as, well, it's what we call the time value of money. The value of money is not the same in time because of this. So not because inflation, but because of these investment possibilities. Because of this, 100 monetary units today is not the equivalent of the same 100 monetary units in 1 year or 2 years or 5 years. So I'm coming back to our problem. We want to compare the value of the capital that we should invest today to the benefits that the exploitation of the investment would bring us in the future. But we are comparing apples and oranges, because even though both of them are being reflected in euros, as you can see, €1 today is not the equivalent of €1 in 5 years. So we need to make them equivalent. I'm stopping for a second, and I need to ask you whether you've done this, I don't know, in the past, in your practical experience or at other classes. Did you encounter this subject before?
I don't remember.
I'm asking you so I would know in what kind of details I should get into. Unfortunately, my graphic tablet doesn't work, so I would have liked to be able to write some formulas on it. So as an alternative, I wrote them down in the Google Sheet. I will show you, at least, well, some of them. I believe I would rather do a simulation. Just give me a second. I'll create temporarily a new page here, a new sheet. So let's say that, of course, for us, let's say that the value of our investment would be of 100 monetary units. Of course, in my case, you have seen it. It's, where is it? I see, it's here. 384,000. But it doesn't matter that much right now. So let's say that I'm thinking about investing 100 monetary units today. And I am promised to get back within the operating activity 20 monetary units a year. So year 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we have already touched the subject. We would not be happy with that. You don't want to grant me a loan of 100 today, so I would only pay it back to you in 1 year. So for sure, it would be even less attractive to pay €100 today just to get it back in 5 years. This wouldn't really make of for much of an investment, right? But am I getting my capital back if this happens? Based on what we have just discussed, not really. Not really. So, for sure, you would not do this investment. None of us would. What if we would get 21 monetary units a year? So overall, we would have 5 monetary units extra. Would that be enough to get us to the investment? Would we need 25 a year? So this is what we would be debating today. Now, in order to compare the two, so the value of the capital that we need to invest at the beginning to the results that we are hoping to gain in the future, as I was saying, we need to adjust them to express them in the same monetary unit. They are in euros, but not really, not the same type of euros because of time. So let's say that you expect 8% for an investment. If you invest 100 monetary units today, in 1 year, you would have what? You would have your 100 monetary units back plus 8%, 8 monetary units. So you would have 100 times 1 plus 8%, 108, right? 1, 2, the number of years. If you take these 108 monetary units and you invest them again at a return rate of 8%, in 1 additional year, you would have 116.64. So you are multiplying your capital. So I can simply use this formula. To calculate the value to which we would get at a return of 8% per year. So this really means that 100 monetary units today is equal to 108 in 1 year, to 117 in 2 years, to 147 approximately in 5 years. Okay? So basically, if I were to ask you, what would you pay me today if I were to promise you that I will pay you in 5 years 147 euros? Well, if you are content with 8% return per year, you would pay me 100, because by you paying me 100 today, you would have in 5 years 147, which means, as I have shown you, 8% return per year. So please try to understand this perspective. I am trying to evaluate future values to bring them into today values, present values. Please imagine it like this. What would I pay today to have that value in the future? How much would I pay today? Can you understand this perspective? I would pay today 100 to have in 5 years 147. That is, if I am satisfied with 8% return. Let's put it the other way around. Let's say that I were to promise you 200,000 euros after 5 years. What would you pay today for that? Well, I would do the calculation in reverse. The value that I would pay today would be 200,000 over 1 plus 8% my return expectations at the power of 5. So I would pay today 136, I believe. Yes, 1,000. And by doing so, look, if I would pay today 136,000 at a yearly return of 8%, in 5 years I would have 200,000. You see? So at this point, we have future values. These values, the net operating cash flows, the yearly net operating cash flows, generated, of course, according to our forecast, generated by operating our investment. So these would be the results of the investment. Now, our question is, how much are they worth today? How much should I pay for these future values today? Because it seems like I need to pay, in my case, 384,000. Are they worth today 384,000? This is the question that we are trying to answer. Hopefully you understand. So, in a first stage, I need to find out what the present value of these future operating cash flows is, and then to see whether the value that I have to pay, the value from the budget, this is what I have to pay, is more or less. If it's less, this means that, while I'm willing to pay maybe 5 euros I'm sorry, 1 euro for a kilo of apples, I'm only demanded to pay 0.8. So of course I'm buying it. It's cheaper than I would have been willing to pay. If the investment budget is more than the present value of the benefits brought by the investment, it's not worth it. I'm not doing the investment. So I will try to put all this in a table. I prepared some formulas for you, but I will explain them to you later on. I'm starting with the net operating cash flows. And I'm connecting the table to the cash flow statement. So I'm bringing the values from and taking the values from here. These are my net operating cash flows, the future values. Now, I want to calculate the present value of these future values. How much would I pay today for each one of these values? But in order to calculate that, as you have seen, hopefully, I need to establish my reference return rate, the return rate that I would be expecting. This process of calculating, of estimating rather, the present value of future gains, this process is called discounting. And the return rate that I'm using as a reference is called discount rate. So I'm saying discount rate. I'm marking the cell in green because I'm going to input the discount rate from my keyboard. I'm going to say 15%, and we are going to debate later on concerning its value. So for the time being, let's say that I would be expecting 15% return. Now, how do I calculate the present value of these future cash flows? And this is exactly what I'm going to write here. Present value of, let's say, the annual net operating cash flows. So there's something else to be said. The decision process is taking place when? The present time is before this implementation period. We are here, we build the budget, we found possible financing sources, and if we decide to do the investment, this is what follows: 2 years of implementation. After these 2 years, this starts. So between us right now and this first year, there are 2 years of implementation, at least, I should say. So implementation year 1, implementation year 2. From us till the end of the first year of implementation, it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and so on. So from the present time, it's 7 years until the end of the forecasting period. This is what I have written down here in well above the table. Now, the value today, the present value of this future value, so happening within 3 years, is what? Let's see. The value of the net cash flow, annual net cash flow, over 1 plus the discount rate, as we've done before, at the power of 3. And I will be doing the same for the other years. In a moment. It's conceivable that in some cases I would have annual net operating cash flows even during the implementation period. There are investments that allow for partial beginning of the operating activity. So you might register revenues and charges, inflows and outflows from operations, even throughout the implementing activity, implementation period, even though that's not the most common situation. So for sure, that's not my case. I would imagine that it's the same for you, but in theory, it's possible, which is why I calculated the present value of even these possible future net cash flows. But of course, it's zero for me and for you for sure. Now, this is what I would pay today, 17,011 euros. I would pay today to have in 3 years 25,871. If I would be satisfied with a return, an annual return of 15%. This is the present value of this future value at 15% expected return. I hope that you understood this. If not, please ask questions. Please review our discussion later on. Read the materials that I also posted on the platform. But you feel free to ask me any questions. So this is the value that we pay today for this future value. 32,210 is the value that we pay today to have in 4 years 56,335, and 80,731 we would pay today to have after 7 years 214,747. Of course, again, expecting and being satisfied with an annual return rate of 15%. Okay, now let's calculate the entire value of these gains. So I'm going to say cumulative, maybe present value, cumulative present value of the future operating cash flows. Cumulative present value of the future, if you wish, of the forecasted annual net operating cash flows. One moment. Format the table. There we go. So I'm going to sum them up. The present values of the annual forecasted net cash flows. So this is what I would pay today for all these future net operating cash flows. 241,000 euros, approximately. This is what I would pay today. Now, are these net operating cash flows, these right here, are these the only gains, financial benefits that our investment would bring us? Not really. Not really. Because if I'm going back to the depreciation table, again, we can see that we have, well, quite a lot of investment components with lifespans of more than 5 years. Some of them can generate, of course, in our estimation, can generate benefits for at least 40 years. So why take into consideration just the benefits generated within the first 5 years? Well, let's have a look. Let's go in the future for not 40 years, maybe 20 years would be enough to see what I'm talking about. So let's say that I would have an investment that would generate 100 monetary units each year for 20 years. What would be the present values? So these are future values. These are present values. Over 1 plus 1 at the, 1 plus 8% at the power of 1. So the 100 from within 1 year in the future is 93 today. 100 from 2 years, 86. And if you continue, you can see that 100 euros or monetary units generated in 20 years from now would really mean 21 today. And if we increase the rate of return, the discount rate, 15%, the 100 monetary units in 20 years that we would get in 20 years would be the equivalent of 6 monetary units today. So of course, much less important. And if you take into consideration the fact that it's basically impossible to do estimations with any kind of accuracy for 20 years, especially right now with the development in the technological and economic field, really those 6 monetary units mean nothing. So because of such reasons, because it's difficult to estimate with any accuracy the future for more than a few years, one reason, and the other because even if we do estimate the future values, the present value of those future values is very low. For these reasons, we don't do estimations for the entire lifespan of the investment. In most of the cases, we do the forecastings for the first 5 years, as we did ourselves. However, we acknowledge the fact that at the end of the 5th year, there still is some value left in the investment. We can either keep the investment and continue exploiting it and thus generating benefits directly, or we could, well, possibly sell it. So in either of these two cases, the question is, what would be the value of the investment at the end of this forecasting period, explicit forecasting period? Because there is a difference, a value at the end of the fifth year. So I want to add that to our calculation. So I'm going to insert here after the net operating cash flows as a future result of the investment. I'm also going to introduce what it's called a residual value of the investment. By residual value of the investment, I mean the value of the infrastructure at the end of the forecasting period, or at the end of the explicit forecasting period. Now, how can I estimate the value of the investment at the end of the fifth year of operations? There are different methods. The most commonly used one is the capitalization method, which states that, well, what's the net operating cash flow for the last year? In our case, 214,000 euros. Can we expect to continue generating more or less the same amount of net operating cash flows throughout the following years? I don't know how many, 5, 6, 7, 10, for a sufficient amount of years. Undefined, but quite a few. If there's no reason to say that that can't be, if that's to be expected, at least in part, we would ask at the end of the fifth year, how much would anyone pay for a machinery, for an infrastructure that would be able to generate in the future 214,000 a year? Well, what return would they be expecting? So I need a capitalization rate, an expected rate of return. Usually, the capitalization rate is considered to be equal to the discount rate. So let's say 15%. So if I expect a 15% yearly return, how much would I pay for something that brings me 214,000 a year? Well, I would pay 214,000 over 15%, which is €1,431,000. So if I were to pay €1,431,000 at 15% return per year, I would get a net operating cash flow, annual net operating cash flow of 214,000, as you can see. Now, again, this is the most commonly used method for estimating the residual value of the investment at the end of the forecasting period. I don't like it, even though it's the most popular one all over the world. I don't like it for, in particular, for startups and for small companies. And just check it out. You will see why in a moment. So this, in my case, this is the value of the investment, initial investment. And after 5 years, I'm estimating that the residual value would be of 1,400,000. So much more than the present value, the value of the initial investment. How can that be? Well, it could be possible in theory if the investment becomes larger than the sum of its parts, in the sense that in time, of course, you get a certain share of the market, you get experience, and you're transforming this infrastructure into a well-oiled machine of generating cash flows. And someone imaginably would be willing to pay more than the initial investment, because at that time it would be able to generate more than the potential of the investment today, something like that. So for a company that is already very stable, I guess that's okay. But for a startup, considering that somewhere over 80%, 85% of the startups die very quickly, I find this approach very, very, very optimistic, much too optimistic. So you can use it if you want to. In many cases, of course, it depends of the beneficiaries of the feasibility study, of your feasibility study. In many cases, they will ask you to use this method, because you might prepare the feasibility study for a bank. Well, I want to say, for convincing the bank to grant you the loan, or as I was saying at the beginning, for a financing agency that would be in the position to grant you with financial subsidies for investments. So they probably have their own methodology, and they will force you to use it. You won't have any choice. But if I would have a choice, I would use a method that's more, well, maybe pessimistic, maybe more realistic. Even though it's not so widespread, it is being used in Romania. I believe it's less used overseas. I would simply use, in such a case such as our own, with startups, I would simply use the net accounting value. So the gross value of the infrastructure at the end of the fifth year, less the accumulated depreciation. So in our case, let me see. I will say here residual value. Gross value investment from accounting and I will go in my implementation chart. The first year ends here on column O. So I will say year 1, year 2. The value of the investments for the first year would be this, the cumulative value. Second year, the rest up until here. Now I have to copy paste them because they are in a different sheet. And in reality, it's this plus this. So from here on, the gross value remains the same. Now, the cumulative depreciation. The depreciation process starts with the operating activity, and we have estimated the depreciation charges already here. but now I'm trying to calculate their cumulative value by adding them up. So the net value of the investment or investment components would be the difference between the two. At the end of the fifth year, the net value from accounting, again, the net value of the investment components would be, in this case, as you can see, of 256,000. So I will leave here the value calculated through capitalization. And for the time being, I'm going to use the value from accounting, the net value, which is, as you can see, smaller and more pessimistic. It does not take into account an increase of value generated through the goodwill, let's say, created within the company. Now, I will insert one more line here to calculate the total benefits generated by the investment. So I have the net operating cash flows, I have the residual value of significance, of course, at the end of the fifth year. And I can say here net operating cash flows. No, I can leave it for the time being like this. Net operating cash flows, residual value, the benefits of the investment. Now we have the discount rate. We calculated the present value of the annual net operating cash flows. And now I want to calculate the present value of the residual value. So present value of the residual value. So residual value over 1 plus the discount rate at the power of 7. That is its value today. That is what I would pay today to have 256,000 in 7 years. Now, the cumulative present value of the future annual net operating cash flows and residual value. So the cumulative present value of all future gains generated by the investment. It's the sum of these two. Now, this is the future value, the present value of the future gains. This is what I would pay today to have these gains in the future. Let's see how much I do pay. In my budget, according to my budget, I would have to pay 384,000. However, I would not be paying the 384,000 today. It would take me 2 years. I have to estimate the present value of these future payments as well. So this is the investment. done with throughout a 2-year period. In other cases, it could be longer. Now I want to calculate the present value of the investment. You understand that even the money for the capital for the investment needs to be brought in present values because we are not paying it today, which is a plus to us. So it's the payment over 1 plus the rate of discount at the power of 1. This is for the second year of investments. And the cumulative present value of investments €311,000. So the point, we would pay the equivalent of €311,000, yes, evaluated in today's values, for something that is worth 338,000. So this is the present value of the future gains. This would be the investment would be the cost of the future gains. The difference between the two, we call it net present value. So the net present value calculated as a difference between the present value and the cost of it. So this probably is the most important financial indicator in evaluating the financial feasibility of investments. If the net present value is 0, it means that, sorry, 1 second, it means that we are paying, this is what we pay, we are paying exactly the price, the correct price for the future gains. This does not mean that we are not gaining anything. No. If the net present value is 0, it means that through the future gains, through the future net operating cash flows with the residual value, we get our financing sources back, so our capital back, plus a surplus that ensure us a return equivalent to, in our case, 15%. So the return that satisfies us. So we get our money back, we get our capital back, plus the expected return. So if the net present value is 0, we get what we want. So we do the investment. The decision is do the investment if the net present value is 0. If the net present value is positive, more than 0, as it is in my case, 26,000 euros, it means that I would be getting my capital back from the future gains. I would get my 15% annual return and something extra. So basically, the return of the investment would be greater than 15%. Of course, the decision would be to do the investment. However, if the net present value would be less than 0, that would mean that I would be paying, this is what I pay, I would be paying more than it's worth. So I would not be able to get my capital back and the 15% annual expected return. So again, if the present value is more than 0, I do the investment. If it's equal to 0, I still do the investment. If it's less than 0, I don't do the investment. Of course, this is a very simple approach. Now, I want to have a look at the formula with EU. Maybe I should put it, I'm not really sure. Maybe here. I guess. So, it's the formula, as I was saying, for the net present value. On one hand, so from here up to here to the minus sign, we have this. This is the sum. Oh, 1 second. Yes. This is the sum of everything plus the residual value. So this is everything until the minus sign is here, right? This is the present value of the future cash flows, this, the sum. So you have sum for I from 1 to n, where I is the number of the year, n is the total number of years of the explicit forecasting period. In our case, from 1 to 7. Net operating cash flow from the year I, 1 to up to 7, times 1 over 1 plus the discount rate, as we've done, 1 plus the discount rate, at the power of the number of the year. And to that, we add the present value of the residual value that we have calculated here. So residual value, as you can see, over 1 plus the discount rate, as you can see it in the formula, at the power n, 7 in our case, the number of years at the end of the explicit forecasting period. And from that, we deduct the sum of the present value of the investments, which we've calculated right here. So again, this is the formula for what we've calculated here. In an easier manner, I guess, by simply using Excel or a Google Sheet, you can do the following. You can put on one line all the cash flows. Investments, net operating cash flows, plus residual value. Well, investments, of course, with the minus sign, I mean, because they are payments. So, minus investments plus net operating cash flows plus residual value. So now we have them all on one line, and the NPV, net present value, you can calculate it in Excel or in a Google Sheet with the function NPV, net present value, and the arguments would be the discount rate, the first one, and these future values. So as you can see, we get the same value. So again, I wanted to explain to you the logics of it. For simple calculation, of course, you can simply use the NPV function in Excel or in the Google Sheet. I will mark it different just to see that it's another version of the same thing. Okay, so that's the net present value. Now, another financial indicator that's also very used and very important is the internal rate of return. I was saying that if the net present value is more than zero, is, well, a positive value, that means that we are being able to recover our capital. We get our expected return equal to the discount rate and something in addition. So really the rate of return of the investment is greater than the discount rate. This means that when the real rate of return of the investment is equal to the discount rate, in our case 15%, the net present value is zero, as here, as you can see here. I'm not sure where to put it. I'm going to make some space. So the question is then, what is the real rate of return of the investment? There's no way of calculating it. It can only be estimated. And the estimation process is being done based on this equivalence. When the discount rate is equal to the real rate of return of the investment, the net present value is zero. So you can see that I have replaced within the formula of the net present value, I have replaced the discount rate with a specific rate, the real rate of return. Internal rate of return, it's what it's called. And if this is done, the net present value would be zero. Now calculate what should the discount rate be for the net present value to be zero. Again, it's not possible to calculate it in particular because we might have many years, so net operating cash flows. You can estimate it. And in the past, it was a struggle, but now with the technology, with the software that is available to us, and in this case, of course, with the Google Sheet, it's simple enough. Let me show you. I'm going to use the same types of cash flows as here. And we are going to ask the Google Sheet to estimate the internal rate of return based on this equality by using the IRR function. So internal rate of return of all this. And it's 17%. So if you will look it up over the internet or for sure in most of the books, if you will check to see, well, check for the definition of the internal rate of return, you will almost always find the internal rate of return defined as the discount rate that makes the net present value equal to zero. Now, I would say that for you who are, of course, graduates, master degree students in this field, because this is your field of expertise right now, this is what your master's is about mostly, I would say. I believe we need to understand it into more detail. So yes, someone that isn't into economics or is just a bachelor's degree graduate might say that the internal rate of return is the discount rate that makes the net present value equal to zero. But the reality is that the internal rate of return is simply the real rate of return of the investment. It just happens that we use this equality. It's that we use this equality, the fact, this law that the ratio would make the net present value equal to zero. But it's not a discount rate per se. But if you want to check it, you can simply replace our discount rate with the real rate of return, and it will make the net present value indeed equal to zero, as you can see. In our case, we are happy with 15%. So if the investment generates 15% annual return, we do it. Well, our investments generates more, 17%. And based on this, we get to a positive net present value. So net present value of more than zero. Even if the net present value would have been zero, and by definition, the internal rate of return would have been equal to the discount rate, 15%, we would have done the investment because it would have given us a rate of return equal to the discount rate, equal to our expected rate of return. Right? Now, not to waste any more time, I have prepared here two tables with two additional financial indicators. So I wanted to build the tables for the net present value and for the internal rate of return in front of you so you may understand them in detail, because I would say these are the most important ones. Two additional indicators, the profitability index and the payback, the discounted payback period. The profitability index is a version of the net present value, only that it is expressed in relative values. So it's not present value of the cash flows and residual value less the investment, but it's simply this sum, the present value of the net operating cash flows and the residual value over the present value of the investment. So it will not be expressed in euros, it would be expressed in percentages, as you will see in a moment. So I'm just linking it to the other tables. I'm taking the net operating cash flow, the residual value, the discount rate, the investment, and that's it, to check whether I've linked everything correctly. Again, I'm going to make the discount rate equal to the internal rate of return, which should make the net present value 0 and the profitability index 1, well, 100%. And it does exactly that, as you can see. So when the net present value is 0, the internal rate of return is equal to the discount rate, and the profitability index is 100%. Lowering again the expectations at 15%. The last indicator is the discounted payback period. One moment. You have here the cumulative value, present value of the investment taken from the previous tables. You have the present value of the net operating cash flows. And now the question is, at what moment do the cash flows, their present value, does it cover entirely the present value of the investment? At what point are we able to say that we have recovered the capital completely? So in my case, it's 6.9 years payback period from the discounted cash flows. So these are the 4 indicators that I want you to use to evaluate the financial feasibility of your investments. What I expect is for you to simply copy the tables to your sheets. So copy paste, it should be enough. Just link them to your cash flow statement. And of course, well, cash flow statement on one hand, and on the other hand, the investment budget or the implementation chart, as I have done. Now, maybe other observations, possibly based on the configurations of your forecastings, your indicators might not be where they should be. What do I mean by that? Well, for instance, what if your net present value is negative? Sure, that would mean it would not be a good idea to do the investment. Well, yes, but I would imagine that your investment will not be that unique, that original. I would imagine that other investments in the same field exist and operate well. So please review your forecastings and find maybe reserves for improvement and change things so your net present value could be positive. So try to optimize the processes to get to a positive net present value. Automatically, that would mean that you would get to a level of the internal rate of return higher than the discount rate, higher than 50%, because for simplification purposes, I want you all to use the 15% benchmark that I have used. However, I also don't want you to get to internal rate of returns of 100%, 200%, because especially for startups where risks are very high, where you would expect the internal rate of return to be a bit higher for a startup because the risks are high. But normally you would expect it to be somewhere between 15 and 25%. So I will write it down as a benchmark. I'm expecting your IRR to be between 15% and 25%. So if it's 15%, your net present value will be 0. Hopefully it will be a bit more. If it's more than 25%, I hope that you have a good explanation. So I'm not saying that it can't be 1000%. I'm only saying that it's extremely rare. So if it is 40, 50, 60, 70%, you'd better prepare a very good explanation, because otherwise I would only know that you've overestimated things, you were over optimistic with your forecasting, or well, negligent. So please take this interval into consideration when configuring your last draft for the main scenario of your forecastings. Now, if you have any questions concerning the feasibility analysis, I want to point out that for sure during the exam, I will ask each one of you I will ask you to define the net present value. So basically, the surplus of value generated after recovering the capital and the expected return equal to the discount rate. I will ask you to define the residual value, the value of the investment at the end of the explicit forecasting period. I will ask you to explain the method through which you have estimated the residual value, either through the capitalization method right here, either as the net accounting value of the components of the investment. I will ask you to explain what the discount rate is. And what it is the expected return, the rate of return that would make us happy. So for which we would do the investment. I will ask you what the discounting process is. And what it is an evaluation of future cash flows, establishing the present value of future cash flows. I will ask you what the internal rate of return is, and it is the real rate of return for the investment. I will ask you how you calculate it, and you're not calculating it, you're estimating it. You're estimating it based on this situation. You understand that if the discount rate would be equal to the real rate of return, the net present value would be zero. So based on this equality, you estimate the net present value. The Excel or the Google Sheet file don't calculate the internal rate of return. They do it through many iterations. They try to see, they start with a discount rate of 10% to see if they get to a net present value equal to zero. If the net present value is positive, they increase the rate, 11, 12, 13. Normally, in about 10 iterations, it should be able to estimate it. It can do, in the end, in fact, a total number of 20 iterations. But normally, if the internal rate of return is within normal limits, common limits, it will estimate it immediately. If the values of the internal rate of return are uncommon, maybe negative, minus 1,000, maybe even less, you will see that the Google Sheet or the Excel file won't find it. But you can help it because you can introduce a second parameter within the function. You can introduce an estimation. If you estimate it to be, let's say, in the vicinity of minus 10,000, you can input that argument within the parameters of the function, and it will start the iterations from there. But that will not be a worry for you, at least in this project. I had such cases in practice, but that should not concern you directly, at least when preparing the project, because of course I expect the internal rate of return to be positive, and as I was saying, somewhere between 15 and 25%. For sure, I will ask you what the value of the net present value would be if the internal rate of return would be equal to the discount rate. And for the same scenario, what the profitability index would be. You have seen that the net present value would be zero and the profitability index would be 100%. Maybe one last subject here. What is the manner in which we normally establish the discount rate? Well, as you have seen, the discount rate is really the desired rate of return. One way to estimate it, to establish it, would be to start from those risk-free investments that we were talking about earlier. So in the case of risk-free investments, which is buying state bonds, maybe the return rate would be the annual return rate would be of, let's say, somewhere between 7 and 8% in lei right now. But again, for an investment with no risk, if you were to do this investment, which involves many risks for sure, you would only do it if you would be able to expect more. So you would want to have a surplus of return, a margin. So you establish the discount rate starting from the 8%, the rate of return for the state bonds, and you add a margin that, in your opinion, covers the extra risk. Let's say 5%. In our case, 7%. 8 plus 7, it's 15%. Now, we can debate many things here, including how we find out what the rate of return is for the relevant investments, whether it's state bonds or whether we can find investments in the same field with comparable risks. We can talk about inflation because if we simply take the rate of return for bonds right now of 7 to 8%, that includes inflation. But on the other hand, we in our forecastings, we did not take future inflation into consideration. So this is one maybe error that is being done in practice all the time. They start from the nominal rate for the state bonds, as I was saying, maybe 7 or 8%, that includes inflation, but they use it to discount cash flows, future cash flows that were estimated without inflation, so in real prices, in constant prices. Again, this can be a debate, but I don't believe that this is the right time to go into details. It's a subject that you can search maybe yourselves and learn more about it. Another method for establishing the discount rate would be to estimate the cost of capital. So you have the investment, you know the financing sources that you would be using, you know their cost, so the interest rates for the bank loans, for the lease contracts, the expected dividends for the equity, and knowing the values of the different types of financing sources, knowing their relative costs, you can calculate the average cost of the capital and establish the discount rate at the same level as the average cost of the capital, because in the end, the return of generated by the investment should be simply enough to cover the cost of the capital, to cover the expectations of the entities that are financing the investment in the end. So we have our financial indicators. And in my case, it looks well. It looks like my investment would generate the expected 15% return and something in addition. So this suggests that I would do the investment. However, at this point, all of us need to realize that these indicators were calculated based on values for the investment and for the net operating cash flows. So based on values that are not certain, but rather subject to risks, many risks. What do I mean by that? Well, for the net operating cash flows, I only have to scroll up and you can see the many tables that stand as a foundation for their values, and they all have cells colored in green, representing what? representing values that I have inputted from my keyboard that really are hypotheses. It's a hypothesis that I would be able to sell the 3-liter box of juice, of apple juice, for €4. As we were seeing before when we did the forecasting, uh, it might be that it's something that I just dreamed last night, so not based on anything. It might be based on prices that I can see right now on the market. So that's based on something, I would say, more than just dreaming. It might be based on contracts or pre-contracts that I have already signed. It's possible. So that makes it a little bit more certain, but it's never certain. It is always subject to risk. So all these green cells are hypotheses and involve risks. These are not factors 100% under our control. So changes in the values of any of these factors would generate changes in the values of the net operating cash flows, and through that would be able to reduce, of course, or increase, but that's not the point right now. They could reduce the value of the net present value or the internal rate of return or the other indicators, profitability index and discounted payback period. So with these risks materializing, such as the price going down, the selling price, the net present value would decrease. It could become negative. So again, in the main scenario of forecasting, my net present value looks well and encourages me to do the investment. But again, this scenario is not certain. There are many, many risks that stand at the basis of it. And it's not only the cash flows that are subjected to risks. It's also the other part of the equation, the investment. The investment right here that would be done from now in the future throughout the following 2 years, according to my implementation chart. Are these values certain? No, they're not. Of course, when I did my budget, I probably negotiated with possible suppliers of equipment, of software, of furniture, with construction companies. However, this is no guarantee that throughout the following 2 years the prices would stay the same. I had many situations in practice where the prices went up for different reasons, even if only because of the changes in the rate of the currency, or maybe because of an increase of prices all over the world for certain materials. That happened a lot throughout the last years in the constructions, well, in all the fields, but in constructions in particular, it happened. In other cases, you might even wrongly estimate the quantities. I mean, especially when you have constructions, you never know what you are going to find out when you start digging for the foundations, for instance. So in many cases, you need extra construction works, which adds up to the budget. So again, I don't want to complicate things. My point is that these values used in the equation of the net present value, these values, on one hand of the investments, on the other hand of the net operating cash flows, are subjected to risks, many risks. And if these risks materialize, the net present value could decrease. Therefore, we need to do some sort of an assessment of these risks as well. And for that, we first usually do a sensitivity analysis. We take all those hypotheses and we try to simulate. what if the price of a box of apple juice decreases? What happens to the net present value? How sensitive is the net present value to decreases in the value of the selling price? So this is what I have prepared here. A table for simulations. Please remember, I told you from the beginning, you will need to do simulations, which is why it's very important to always connect the cells. Never introduce the same hypothesis from your keyboard twice or copy paste things. You always connect the cells within formulas. So I marked with 0 the values from my main scenario, the one that you can see right now. And now I'm going to simulate a different scenario. In the first table, I'm going to simulate a reduction in the price for the apple juice. In my main scenario, the price is of 4 euros, and I'm going to simulate its reduction to 3.9. The net present value in my main scenario is of 26,000. I'm going to break the link. So copy, paste values. Now I'm going back to the table where I've estimated the revenues from selling of apple juice, and I'm decreasing the price to 3.9. Of course, my cells are connected. The price decreases for the entire explicit forecasting period and changes throughout the entire sheet. And because of this, let's see, the net present value should be decreasing, and it does so. It decreases to 5,036. Now, the decrease of the price from 4 to 3.9, so basically by 10 cents, is a relative decrease of negative 2.5. So it's the absolute variation over the value from the main scenario, negative 2.5%. Now, the net present value decreases to 5,000. So by 80%. The ratio between the two, between the variation of the net present value, the relative variation of the net present value, and the relative variation of the factor, the price, is of 32.4. Now, we will use the following scale. If this sensitivity coefficient, so relative variation of the net present value over the relative variation of the factor, this is how we calculate the sensitivity coefficient. If the sensitivity coefficient is lower than 4, we classify the factor as, well, showing low sensitivity. Well, I don't know how to put it, because it's not the factor that shows sensitivity. It's the net present value that is sensitive in relation to the factor. In this, so if it's the coefficient is lower than 4, we are talking about low sensitivity of the net present value related to the tested factor. If the sensitivity coefficient is between 4 and 9, we will classify the sensitivity as average. And if it's more than 9, we will say that the sensitivity is high. So do this. And do it for Well, all the hypotheses, or at least those that you would consider to be the most important ones. Once you've done it, 1 second. Once you've done it, copy paste the value of the net present value. Make sure that you do so. So this table is completely, the links are broken from everything else. Now you go back and change the price to the main scenario, in my case, 4 euros. So make sure that you are back in your main scenario and your net present value is again of, in my case, 26,000. I'm back. Now, I'll copy the table and use it for a different factor. And I'm only going to do one more simulation. I'm going to simulate the increase in the price of apples, which are my raw materials. So in my case, the price of the apples in my main scenario was estimated at 0.2. So in the table, I'm going to say 0.2, the value from the main scenario, and the risk would be of it, of course, increasing. So I'm going to increase it at whatever, let's say 0.25. So by 25%, can be whatever, 0.21, because in the end we are going to use the relative variation of the net present value. Now, I'm going to change it to 0.25. And the net present value should decrease again. Whoa, and it's negative. I'm linking the second table to the table where I have calculated the net present value. Just for a second, copy, paste values. So I'm breaking the link now. And I'm going back, change the price for the apples at 0.2. So I'm going back to my main scenario, but I'm keeping the table with the simulation. So I have simulated an increase in the price for a kilo of apples from 0.2 euros to 0.25. So a relative variation of 25%, which generates a reduction of the net present value to minus 37,000. So by minus 242%, which basically involves a sensitivity coefficient of 9.7. So high sensitivity of the net present value towards the variation of the price for the raw materials. Now, please do these simulations for your most important, what you would believe to be your most important factors. So as I did, prices, sell prices, prices for the raw materials, prices for energy, quantities being sold, but in particular the value of the demand. That's, I would say, the most volatile factor. So do whatever, 15, 20 such tables, because as you have seen, it takes you a minute or two to do one table. So it won't take you a lot. The point of this is to identify the factors to which you are the most sensitive. You will see that you will probably have 4 or 5 factors tops at which the net present value would be very sensitive. So for those 3, 4, 5 factors with the highest sensitivity coefficients, for those, try to do a risk analysis. In what sense? And I have written something here. So, in the case of the price for the apples, what could be the causes? So, for each factor that we consider to be important from the point of view of the sensitivity of the net present value, we have to ask ourselves, what could be the causes of such a variation? What could determine in the future the price of the apples to increase? What could be the possible causes? Right? Then, if that were to happen in the future, would we get any warning signs before it happening? Then, is there any way in which we could influence the price for the apples? Can we stop the risk from materializing? Or in any case, reduce the increase of the price of the apples? Do we have any control? For some factors, we have some control. For others, we probably have no control. And in the end, if the variation happens, or rather when the variation happens, because we have talked about it when we did the forecasting, it would be naive to imagine that all these factors would materialize at the exact values that we have forecasted and will stay there for the entire explicit forecasting period. That can't happen. They will vary it all the time, sometimes in our favor, sometimes against us. So such variations will produce, and they happen every day for basically all the existing companies. So we have to prepare ourselves. When the risk materializes, what do? We have to prepare some measures, because otherwise, the first time that the price for the apples increases, we are out of business. We have to find something to do, a possible reaction to stay online. To stay, on our course. Possible solutions, right? And possible answers to these questions. So why would the price for the apples increase? Maybe because of the seasonality. If I buy the apples in autumn or winter, the price would be lower. If I wait and try to buy them in spring, the prices would go up, would be higher. Another possible cause, crop failure. Maybe we have the producers in agriculture. They have a bad year because of maybe rain, because of heat, because of who knows what, diseases, and the production is lower, which makes the offer on the market of apples be lower, well, compared to the demand. And in a market-based economy, that should make the prices go up. The costs for the suppliers going up as energy prices, fuel prices, right? That would probably make the prices of the raw materials go up as the production costs go up. Possible warnings beforehand. Market news, the subject could be debated that we have a bad year in agriculture, or that the prices are going up because of increases in the fuel costs and so on. Can we control the prices for the apples and basically the causes that I mentioned? I guess we can't really control the weather, generally speaking. But there might be ways, for instance, we might be able to sign contracts on a longer term that would guarantee us certain prices. Sometimes it could be possible. At other times, not so much. What do we do if the prices do go up? Well, try to change the suppliers, maybe. Renegotiate the prices, I said there. Maybe reduce the consumptions. So, okay, the prices go up, but maybe we can reduce the specific consumption. So we end up, hopefully, with the same value of the raw material charges. And in the end, if that's not possible, try to reduce other prices, other charges, or try to increase the prices to compensate. So these are only examples. I'm sure that you can find many, many, many more things to say. This serves you as an example. So please treat the main risk factors for you in the same manner. And you can prepare some sort of a plan like this. So for the raw material, let's see. The sensitivity coefficient was what? 9.7. So you can create a table in the end with all the important factors, 4, 5, 6 important factors. They would probably be the selling prices, the prices for raw materials, the volume of the demand, maybe the wage, the individual wages. So prepare a table with the most important factors. By that I mean the factors to which the net present value would be most sensitive. And analyze, as I was saying, causes, early warnings, possibilities of control, and solutions of a response plan. And this is it. This is it for your feasibility analysis, chapter 5, the indicators, for the sensitivity analysis, and for the risk analysis. So once you've done the calculations in the Google Sheet for the forecasting, and you have everything ready, you know that it's done, it's the final form. Copy the tables into your Word document, your feasibility study. For instance, the forecasted revenues, right? I'm going in my Google Sheet and I'm copying the tables with the forecasts for the revenues. Of course, I only have the apple juice, but you probably have more product types of products, I mean. Arrange the tables in your Word document. Of course, as you can see, the page is not that large. Either I reduce the dimension of the font to work like this maybe. Either I turn the page as a landscape, which I would probably do. So range everything so it can also be understood. That's the point of the feasibility study, to present it to someone that would also be able to read it. And after the table, I would write. I would write in a few phrases the fact that the revenues from the selling of the apple juice were estimated based on one hand or taking into account the production capacity, but at the same time the value of the demand. The production capacity was estimated based on the hypothesis that we would be producing for 4 hours a day and so on, whereas the market demand was estimated based on the marketing strategy presented in the previous chapter. The estimation was done in constant prices, and therefore the prices were left at €4 per box in accordance to the price policy within the marketing mix in chapter 3. Okay, I go on with the charges. I copy in the same manner the tables with the charges. I arrange them correctly within the Word document, and I explain in 2 or 3 phrases for each table what I've done, what were the main hypotheses. You finish with this. You copy, of course, the operating budget. You copy the forecasted cash flow statement. You will have them, of course, in your Google Sheet. Then you get to the feasibility analysis. Net present value. Again, I'm arranging the sheet, and I'm copying the table. With a window, and if you need to, you can also decrease the dimensions of the font. Make sure that you explain the most important parts. Again, my suggestion is to explain that the net present value is positive of 26,000, in my case 359, and what that means. That through the investment we are able to, through the future net operating cash flows with the residual value, we would be able to recover the capital to get the return, the expected return of 15%, and something in addition. So the positive value suggests to us to do the investment. So at least explain that. The same for the other indicators. Arrange the tables and explain what you've done there and what the conclusion is, how you would make the decision based on each indicator. Then, for the sensitivity analysis, you simply copy each table, at a time, not all of them at the same time, at a time. Arrange them. Great. Okay, you can do a better job. I'm not going to waste time now. So copy the tables and at least draw a conclusion. Show what the most important 3 or 4 or 5 factors are in terms of sensitivity. And then for the risk analysis, you can simply prepare maybe a table such as this one. Hopefully you will develop it a little bit more. And then, as you have the final form of the feasibility study, of course you correct the table of contents and you upload it on the platform. I'm going to create a section here. So you upload the feasibility studies here. Again, I'm leaving you the option to only upload the final draft. I don't need you to upload Google Sheets or anything else. You upload just the feasibility study in Word or in PDF if you want to. Only one document. I don't know the date of the exam, it's not set yet, but I know that you have, I believe, 2 weeks right now to prepare to finalize your dissertation paper. So I imagine that the exam would be somewhere near the end of June. Not sure. Let's say for the time being, 30th of June. I will change it once I know the date of the exam. In any case, the deadline will be the date and basically the time of the exam. I imagine that the exam would start at 6 o'clock, as our classes did. So you will have until the day of the exam, 6 o'clock, to upload the projects. And that's about it. So I recorded the session from today as well, so you would be able to see it later on if you need to. If you have any questions, please go ahead. You have access, of course, to my Google Sheets. Remember that I have one with the budget and implementation chart and financing sources, and the second one in which I worked more today, where I've done the financial forecasting and the feasibility analysis and sensitivity analysis. So feel free to take the tables that I've done. I've done them in front of you specifically to show you how it's done. I've done the work. I hope that you have seen that. I could have just used tables that I have from before. I have done this probably thousands of times, so I don't really feel the need to practice that much. But I've done it so I would show you how it's done, and of course also to motivate you. I mean, I've done the work, you do it too. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to write me emails. I will try to answer as fast as I can. If you need to see me again, that can happen as well. So debate, and if you feel that you have questions later on, send me an email and we can organize another meeting. But if you have questions for the time being.
For the exam part,
Yes.
what will have it?
How will the exam take place? We will have to see each other face to face. Those are the rules. Of course, you probably know that because I imagine that you've done it in the same manner for the last 2 years. So we'll see us. I don't know. We'll see at on Pestalozzi Street at the Faculty of Economics.
Yeah.
You will have to present your feasibility studies. So don't prepare PowerPoint presentations. I'm not going to watch your PowerPoint presentations. You will have How many of you are there?
11,
I
12,
will leave
I think.
11, 12. So if I leave you 10 minutes for the presentation plus 2 or 3 minutes for my questions, let's say 15 minutes in total, times 10, 11, 12. So it would be approximately 115, approximately 180 minutes, 3 hours. Okay, that's great. So please prepare presentations of your feasibility studies of 10 minutes. But when I say prepare presentations, as I was saying, I don't want you to lose time to prepare PowerPoint presentations. I will listen to you, but I will look within your feasibility studies. So, as I was saying, you will upload the feasibility studies on the platform. That means that I probably won't have the time to see them before. You will upload them, I guess, just before the exam. So I won't have the time to analyze them before the exam. I will watch within your physics study while you speak. This is the way I do it, and you will see that I will listen to you. But in 10 minutes, I will be able to observe the most important errors, if there are important errors, so that after a presentation, I would be able to ask you questions. So if the feasibility studies are well done, I will have, well, less questions. Hopefully, I won't have any questions. I will have more questions there where maybe you haven't been present throughout the semester, where you haven't done the work with me. Some of you did, some others might have missed some classes. So I'm not really interested in studies that were not done with me. I've told you that from the beginning. My way of working was of working with you. I've done the work. I expected you to work with me. So I hope that I won't have any projects that were not done throughout the semesters with me. I don't like those. So I will have questions there where things are not right. If everything is right, if you've done the work with me, I probably already know what you've done, at least in a great part, and I won't have that many questions. For sure, I will ask you questions from that chapter of the feasibility analysis, as I have told you. So I would suggest you prepare a presentation. I mean, you prepare yourself to present within 10 minutes the different parts of the feasibility study. Start by presenting the idea, then continue with the most important parts of the operating cycle, then continue with the budget. Of course, that's basically the core of the feasibility study. Then present the financing sources, in particular the type of non-reimbursable subsidies that you propose, the program that you had in view. Continue with the market analysis, so present them, identify the market, show me how you've done the market analysis there. I want to see more than anything that you've done real market analysis based on a survey, as I asked you to. Present the main conclusions, then present your marketing mix. Of course, not in detail, but I want to see specifically how you took into consideration the conclusions of the market study when you configure the marketing mix, the marketing strategy. Then get to the financial planning, and of course, you can only present in maybe 1 minute, 1 or 2 minutes, the most important hypothesis, the types of revenues, the most important charges, maybe 2 or 3 hypotheses that you took into consideration when you forecasted the revenues. Then, of course, get to the feasibility analysis, and there present into much more detail the conclusions that you can draw based on the values of the indicators. As I have said, this is the most technical part, the most specific part, because the other chapters, they use a lot of information that you have of knowledge, I mean, that you have already from other disciplines, such as marketing, financial management, and so on. So this is the most specific part, specific to this discipline. the feasibility and the sensitivity analysis. So present them in more detail. I want to see that you have understood the process and you understand the way in which you can make decisions based on the values of the indicators. And as I said at the end, I would probably have some questions for you, of course, based on what I have probably not seen within your feasibility study. Don't, please, I really hope that nobody thinks about it. Please don't come at the exam with projects that you have not done yourselves. So this is one thing that I will not tolerate for sure. I've worked with you, I've done the work, I expect the same. So please don't insult yourselves and me with projects that you've not done yourselves. Other than that, I don't see any problems. I'm continuing to be at your disposal. If you need me, please write me at any time. Again, I'm willing to do the work with you, but my expectation is that you do a high quality job.
I understand. Thank you.
If there are other questions from you,